We cannot attract anything in our life that we feel separate from. The moment you feel the lack and the separation, you're holding yourself hostage to the past.
Best-selling author.
He's lectured and given advanced workshops in more than 30 countries.
Dr. Joe Dispenza.
How I want to be. This is about conditioning my body emotionally into the future. As long as I'm feeling this emotion, I'm going to believe in that future.
What is blocking us from manifesting love? We're thrilled to announce that we've reached 3 million subscribers. We're incredibly grateful for each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on any of our new releases. We're dedicated to bringing you the content you love. Our team carefully analyzes what resonates most with you to bring on board the best experts and storytellers to help you improve your life. Some of your favorite topics are sleep science, weight loss, physical fitness, navigating breakups, habit building, and understanding toxic relationships. Upcoming episodes include one of the biggest names in health and science, world-renowned relationship therapist, and your favorite manifestation expert is back to drop new findings. Hit subscribe to not miss any of these episodes. If you think of someone who would love this episode, send it to them to make their day.
The #1 health and wellness podcast.
Jayshetty.
Jayshetty.
The one, the only Jayshetty.
What is blocking us from manifesting love?
I really think that the majority of people spend most of their time in a state of readiness in their life. They're always ready for whatever's going to take place. And it's like an idol. So the hormones that are associated with getting up and going and reacting stressfully, those hormones are hormones that create a primitive mechanism where we go into survival, right? And living in stress and living in survival is not a time for us to open our hearts, right? So get bruised, get damaged, get injured in your life, the stronger the emotion you feel towards that event in your life, the more altered you feel from that experience. The brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot, and that's called a long-term memory. So people think about the problems that happened in the past, and they produce the same chemistry in their brain and body as if the event was happening. So what happens is the body gets conditioned emotionally into the past. So now the trauma or the betrayal is not just in the brain now, it's in the body. So the body, in a sense, gets programmed or conditioned to stay in survival. And when you're in survival, it's not a time to be vulnerable. It's not a time to open our hearts. It's not a time to create. It's in a state of arousal where we have to keep our attention on things that matter, the things in our environment, the way our body is feeling and how we're managing ourselves, and time in and of itself. So to change is to be greater than your body, to be greater than your environment, and to be greater than time. And so when we're stressed, it's really hard to change. When we're stressed, it's really not a time to change, it's not a time to create, and it's not a time to learn. So then this is a mechanism that's primitive in our biology. And to be able to tame the animal so that the animal self, so it's no longer in a state of readiness, trying to always predict the worst case scenario, just so you could be ready if it happens. It turns out that that's the conversion of those survival states into a state of creation. We've discovered some really important things about it. And if you teach people how to convert from that sympathetic nervous system to the parasympathetic nervous system, if you teach them how to trade resentment and impatience and frustration, justified or not, that's doing no good for you, for an elevated emotion, and actually practice making the chemistry that is associated with love. And in the beginning, it's difficult. And so if you place your attention on your heart, we discovered that there's a very low frequency that you can measure that actually goes up, that's indigenous to what the heart needs in terms of a life force to beat. So where you place your attention is where you place your energy, and all the things you can place your attention on, place it on your heart. Now, slow your breathing down, and if you can slow your breathing down, you can take your body out of that state of readiness. And when you slow your breathing down, you slow your brain waves down and your body starts to move out of that state of sympathetic arousal. Practice feeling elevated emotions with your heart, kindness, care, love, appreciation, gratitude, and you'll get good at feeling that way if you keep doing it. So then when a person's in that state, the heart in and of itself, when it's activated like that, gets super organized. It gets coherent and it sends a signal to the brain, literally in the form of information to tell the brain, the survival system to shut down, that the amygdala, literally, the lights go out. It resets the baseline for the trauma in the brain, and the body moves out of survival. And now it wants to create, and the heart informs the brain to get creative, and the brain goes into these beautiful, organized alpha brainwave patterns. And in alpha, we tend to imagine, we tend to create, we tend to dream. So the heart informs the brain, it's time to create. That's, I think, when we're in that state of inspiration where we're actually falling in love with what we're creating. We're bonding to that creation. The stronger the emotion we feel, the more we remember that future. And I think that's how people really begin to make those changes. Now, getting there is a daily practice. Getting there is something that you have to keep doing. So the block for us to feel love is that if we're living in survival, you have to make up your mind that state is not a state to create in, and break away from the people in your life and your schedule and your phone and all the obligations you have long enough to reset just for a little period of time and to remember.
Yeah.
So you don't forget. I think that's where it becomes super valuable.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really important nerve there, this idea that we're living in a constant state of stress. And when I think about our community who are thinking about dating, and I think about friends in my life that are trying to find romantic love, especially in their life, and their feeling around dating, mentally, physically, emotionally, is stressful. The idea of dating is stressful. The idea of being on a date is stressful. The idea of talking to someone is stressful. And it's so interesting, you're so right, that how are you going to create when all of your emotions around this is stress? You've got the stress of a timeline. Gosh, I'm in my mid-30s. I should have found someone by now, is things I hear. Oh, I'm in the stress of, I've been out on 7 dates in the last couple of months and none of them were good enough. And so I'm in the stress of scarcity. And so you're so right. That's what we're feeling. How do we get out of that system and that cycle? Because a lot of the time we've developed that feeling towards finding romantic love for like weeks, months, years.
Yeah.
How do you break that cycle?
There's nothing wrong with doing any of those things. But when we're stressed, we're altered. That stress is when we're out of balance. We're not ourselves, right? We can't relax and be authentic. And so typically, it usually takes a crisis or a disease or a diagnosis or a trauma or a loss or a betrayal for a person to really decide, is this really who I want to continue to be? So my message is, why wait for that, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying, I want to be in a relationship. I want the following things in a relationship from this person, or what might be my ideal relationship.
How detailed should you get on something like that? Like, should you be talking about physical things, or is it mainly emotional and connectedness? Like,
I think people have an image in their mind of what they like or what their type is or whatever. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think what people are really looking for is connection and joy. Like, people should be in a relationship. The reason they should be in a relationship is to be overjoyed to be with the person that you're with, right? You want joy in your life. For me, it would make sense then if the person got very clear on what they wanted, then they should start on the journey to become that very person. They should really work on being that very person that they want. So there would have to be some change that they would have to make in order to be worthy enough to create a person that they would attract in their life. And we cannot attract anything in our life that we feel separate from. Trusting in a future that you can't see or experience, you have to lay down the very thing you use your whole life to get what you want, to trust that something greater could happen, and that's not something that's very easy. So I like the idea that it wouldn't happen on a date that was from an app. It could happen in a bank. It could happen at a seminar. It could happen in the grocery store, all in a way that you least expect, right? And I think that when we get to a point where we're so happy with ourselves, we're no longer looking because we feel like we already have it. I think that's the state where people attract an equal.
Mm. Getting to that place feels like a challenge for people because it feels like I'm doing this so that I can get someone.
Yeah.
Right? It's always like connected that way as a...
Well, we're conditioned that way. We're conditioned in a way to like, okay, I need something out there. I need the experience, the proof. I need the event to occur. And the end product of that event or experience is called an emotion. The emotion takes away the lack or separation from not having it. So we're waiting for the event to occur to take away the feeling of separation or lack. And actually, that's not the healthiest way to create. And actually, we should feel the emotion of the experience before it happens, so that if you're feeling the emotion of that future before it happens, truly feeling it, you wouldn't be looking for it. You would only be looking for it when you felt separate from it, right? So can you maintain that state? Because the only way you're going to believe in that future is you have to feel the emotion associated with it.
So good.
The moment you feel the lack and the separation, you're going to believe in the past. And there's a story that goes along with the past that has everything to do with it. Dating is hard, or finding a person, or whatever that is. The story that we tell ourselves that we actually accept, believe, and surrender to as if it's the truth, right? So that's exactly what programs the subconscious mind into a belief, right? So the default is so seamless to lose that vision or that belief in the future the moment we start feeling the emotions of lack or survival in the past, right? That's the moment we can't see that future any longer, because we would be looking at that future through the lens of the past, and we would doubt that future could actually exist. So it's really an interesting thing that I learned just in the last few years, because I interview hundreds of people backstage that have had a dramatic change in their health. I'm talking about significant chronic diseases where they have no blood values that are abnormal, have no scans that show any signs of the disease any longer. And I asked them, like, how did you do that? Like, what did you do? And some of them say, like, I was doing my meditation sometimes 3 times a day because the drugs weren't working, the chemo wasn't working, the drug trials weren't working, the surgeries weren't working, the radiation wasn't working, the diet wasn't working, nothing was working, right? And so the only thing that they were left with was the belief in themselves. And when you believe in yourself, you got to believe in possibility. And when you believe in possibility, you have to believe in yourself. So they were doing their meditations 3 times a day because they lost their belief that they could heal. They lost their belief. And so they were doing their meditation again to change their emotional state so that they could believe in that future again instead of believe in their past. If you keep doing that, it's that thought and that feeling, it's that image, that's emotion, that stimulus and response that's conditioning the body emotionally into the future. And that's really how you change the belief. So the people were doing the work to change their belief because they defaulted back to the self-doubt, and that of course is disbelief, and that's chronic, right? So then how many times do we have to do that until we stop doing that and start doing something else? I think that's when our reality begins to change. We have a lot of beliefs about things that we're not even conscious of.
And they're not been tested. We don't know if they're true.
We don't know if they're true. We've actually, in fact, made them up.
What happens when someone's been catfished? When they've been heartbroken? When they've been cheated on?
The stronger the emotion you feel from some event in your life, the more altered you are inside of you, the more you remember the event. You're holding yourself hostage to the past.
What's the challenge when someone's lost their belief because they've had a heartbreak? Let's say, what happens when someone's been catfished, when they've been betrayed, when they've been heartbroken, when they've been cheated on, when they've been lied to, manipulated, gaslit. Like they've had a moment that has made them lose belief because they've been hurt and broken so many times in love.
Yeah.
And now you're right, on a belief level, they don't believe they're lovable. They don't believe love exists for them. They don't believe good people exist, right? These are all beliefs. And so what do you do when you've actually gone through quite a, you could call it a traumatic, a toxic event or experience that someone's been through?
Yeah, I think everybody's had those. I think, once again, the stronger the emotion you feel from some event in your life, the more altered you are inside of you, the more you remember the event. The brain actually freezes that frame, right? So the person thinks neurologically within the circuitry of that experience, and they feel chemically within the boundaries of that emotion. And how we think and how we feel becomes our state of being. So every time they remember the event, they're producing that same chemistry, as I said, over and over again, and you're conditioning the body into a belief, right? And the moment we draw a conclusion about that experience, that's the belief, right? That becomes the belief that we accept to, believe, and surrender to. So then beliefs are subconscious states of being, right? So And it tends to be 95% of who we are by the time we get to the middle of our life. So it's those subconscious beliefs that really run our life and run our reality. So it would make sense then to the person, unless I can heal from the experience and overcome the emotion, because the memory without the emotional charge is called wisdom, and you never have to do it again because you know now that you know. If that's the truth, then okay, I'll do this for a period of time, but this state is not loving to me. Living in this state is not loving to me. What's loving to me is that I actually overcome the emotion of the past. And when I overcome the emotion of the past, now the body's no longer believing in that any longer, right? So that theoretically is easier said than done. So the survival emotions tend to become very addictive. So the rush of just remembering the event is an arousal for the body, and people become very addicted to their beliefs, right? And so, but if you tell a person like, okay, your subconscious mind is going to keep replaying the same experience in your life unless you heal, okay, that could make sense to certain people. If you can't overcome that emotion, then you'll never be able to open your heart. So do you want love in your life or not? Okay, forgiveness then, and we've discovered this. Forgiveness is when you overcome the emotion of your past and you no longer have your attention on that person or that experience any longer, right? And so you feel so good that you no longer want to feel bad, right? And so you free yourself from that belief, and you free that person as well, or the experience. And literally that's energy that's liberated as information that the body can actually use to create with, right? So I think there's information and knowledge that just has to be given to people for them to understand, okay, justified or not, valid or not. The only person that this really is affecting is me. They went on with their life.
Yeah.
They started a new career. They're living in a new place. They're writing a book. They're on their way, and you're holding yourself hostage to the past, right? So then you got to trust that love is available or love is real. In order for you to create someone in your life that is loving, you would have to be worthy of love. And that means you would have to feel love too. So I think people make their way out of this all the time. And we deal with severe PTSD, with veterans. And there's some pretty brutal memories there. And there's a lot of trauma that's stored in the body as well. And they deal with a lot of difficulties. And when you tell them, it's the heart that resets the baseline for the trauma in the brain. All you have to do is have the courage to open that thing again. And they may come up against themselves for a few days, but once it happens, And they understand the process. Their past is wisdom. They don't have to ever go back there again, right? They understand it all, but there's no charge associated with it any longer. And that's when we belong to the future, right? That's when the synchronicities and the coincidences and the miracles and the opportunities begin to show up in our life that prove to us that we are the creators of our life.
What's the anatomy of belief? Because I feel like we know that beliefs are repeated patterns, they're repeated conditioned ideas, they're so hardwired. And if we were to start picking up, is it that we're picking apart our beliefs, or we're purifying them, or we're renewing them? Like what's the process?
So I believe that all beliefs are created from past experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And a belief is just a thought you keep thinking over and over again.
Yes.
Until you hardwire it in your brain. And a hardwired set of circuits is an automatic, unconscious program. So we have a lot of beliefs about things that we're not even conscious of.
And they're not been tested. We don't know if they're true.
We don't know if they're true. We've actually, in fact, made them up.
Yeah.
And this happens quite a bit in the work that we do. People see the testimonials, they see the science, they see the data, and they say, oh my God, I actually believe that this stuff works. And they're facing a chronic health condition or serious health condition. And they come to the realization that they just became conscious that they didn't believe it would work for them. It would work. It looks like it works, but I never thought it could work for me. Now, this is a big moment, because this is the moment where you're stepping out of the bleachers onto the playing field, right? This is now where you got to show up for yourself, right? The person, when they sit down and they decide to make a different choice, and this is the hardest part about change. The moment you decide to make a different choice, you're going to feel uncomfortable.
Very, yeah.
You're going to leave the familiar known, right? And the body, which has been conditioned into the past, into the known, which has been conditioned to be the mind. The servant's the master, and it's going to try to talk you out of that future that is unfamiliar, or unknown, or unpredictable. And so that's the moment where the beliefs start coming up. You know, you're not good enough. This is too hard. You'll never change. You can't create anything. It's this person's fault. There's something wrong with me. I want to quit. And then people say like, oh, well, I have ADD, you know, I can't focus my mind. And it turns out they say, I'm not a good meditator, or I can't control my mind, and meditation's not for me. But really, I'm doing it wrong, they'll say. But in fact, they're actually doing it right. Because sitting with yourself and becoming conscious of all of those unconscious thoughts means now you're no longer the program. You're only the program when you're unconscious to that belief. The moment you become conscious of that unconscious belief, the greater the probability that you won't go unconscious to it again. And that's how you become more conscious, is catching yourself going unconscious, and it becomes a skill. The more you practice it, the better you get at going like, I'm just not going to believe that any longer. And nerve cells that no longer fire together no longer wire together. So as you attend to that thought and notice it and observe it without actually believing it, it weakens the connections neurologically in the brain. And there's a neurological death or a separation that's taking place. Okay, so the person then who blames and complains and makes excuses and feels sorry for themselves and behaves a certain way, well, those are habits, right? And those are unconscious programmed behaviors. The only way you're going to change is to become conscious that you complain all day long or you blame somebody for your life. A happy person would never want to be that, want to behave that way, and would never want to be in a relationship with a person who complains all the time. Why would you, right? So then that person says, okay, how many times do I have to forget until I stop forgetting and start remembering? That is my moment of change. So today, I'm going to behave in a different way and make a different choice. I'm going to just stay conscious to not do these things. Okay, and then the person says, well, I feel unworthy, I feel stressed, I feel unhappy, I feel sad, I feel victimized, I feel grief, whatever. Is this the emotion that I want to have in my future? Well, no, these are emotions that are connected to experiences of the past. If I truly want love in my life, I can't feel resentment. Okay, am I willing to trade resentment for this elevated emotion? Okay, let me just remember all the times in my day, if I start noticing feeling this emotion, I'm just going to become conscious and not go unconscious to it and just temper it and work with it. Okay, so that is that overcoming process. That is the becoming process. Now, it would make sense then, you would have to ask yourself, what do I want to believe? What is a thought that I do want to fire and wire in my brain? So with intention and with attention, if you had the person remember what they wanted to believe and keep remembering what they want to believe and keep remembering what they want to believe, they begin to install the hardware. If you keep attending to it, the hardware becomes like a software program, and now that's the new belief.
Yeah.
I can heal. I can find the relationship. And belief is like pregnancy. Either you are or you're not. I mean, there's no in between. So you want to install the circuitry to such a degree that that's the new voice in your head.
Yeah.
That's saying, come on, Jay, get up. Come on, Jay, let's go. Come on, you can do this. Come on, make the time for it. Come on, this is your vision. Come on.
It's a coach in your own head.
It's a voice.
Yeah, a voice.
The voice is no longer the disbelief. The voice is basically your future self talking to you is what it is. It's your future. All right, so if I start behaving in the old way, I know I'm gonna disbelieve. So how do I want to behave? How am I going to behave on my next date? How am I going to behave on my next Zoom meeting with my team? How am I going to behave with my children or in my family, or with my partner, with my ex? How do I want to be? And the act of rehearsing mentally in your mind who you want to be, the act of just closing your eyes and mentally rehearsing that scene literally causes the brain to look like you already did it. It looks like it's already happened, right? So now you're priming the brain neurologically. Keep doing it over and over again. The hardware becomes more automatic, like a software program. You naturally get your behaviors to match your intentions, and because you installed the circuitry. Practice feeling the elevated emotion. If you feel that emotion and you say, when I feel this emotion, I can believe in that future, then let me just keep remembering to feel this way in every part of my day. And this is not about positive thinking. This is about conditioning my body emotionally into the future. So I got to keep my energy up the entire day, and I can't default back to the old person. As long as I'm feeling this emotion, I'm going to behave that way. As long as I'm feeling this emotion, I'm going to believe in that future. If I maintain this modified state of mind and body my entire day as an experiment, should there be some evidence in my life as a result of my change in state of being, a synchronicity, a coincidence? And if there is, then I'm going to do it again. I'm going to actually do it again. And I think that's how we start stepping into that future. Stress consumes enormous amounts of energy for the body. So the repetition of that begins to downregulate genes and create disease. So the question is, can your thoughts make you well? I've seen people with all kinds of health conditions, from muscular dystrophy to spinal cord injuries, to Parkinson's disease, to stage 4 cancers, go into complete remission. The person changed, and when they changed, their health changed.
What are some practices and what are milestones in the day that people can use to hardwire those thoughts and beliefs? Like, what are some mechanisms, what are some tactics that can make a day feel like, okay, that's my game plan for how I'm going to do this? Because as you rightly said, you think about it in the morning, okay, I'm going to try and do this. And then you're late for that meeting, you spill coffee over yourself, something happened, the kids aren't, and then you're stressed. And now all of a sudden you've gone from being at this end to that. And what are some key checkpoints throughout a 24
Well, I don't
hours?
think it's bad to react. I mean, everybody reacts. I react. The question is, how long are you going to react? That's the real question. Like, how long are you going to keep that going? Because surely if you're feeling that emotion, you're going to behave as if you're in your past. And you're going to believe in that past. You're actually going to believe that it's valid to behave that way. Okay. So if people just set the intention in the beginning of their day, and we've all done this, and gone unconscious within the first hour,
Yep.
whatever it takes for that person, if it is before they sit down and eat lunch, that they check in with themselves and see if if they've fallen from grace, or if they're still in that state or where they're at. If they do it on their break, the person who's possessed in a good way, when they understand, like, when I change, my life changes, and nothing changes in my life until I change, a person who's really, really committed to that, they will constantly be checking in with themselves, because they're paying more attention to their inner world. They're paying more attention to themselves and less attention to everybody else. They're really regulating their state. So any reminder a person has, and I do this sometimes 3 times a day, I have to break away and remember, like, I'm losing it. Like, my energy's dropping. And in the light of all eternity, this moment matters more than anything else, because it's never going to be the right time. It's never going to be the right time when you feel that emotion. If I could convert right now, and when it's the hardest, it matters the most. If I can just get back into my heart and change my state, synchronize my heart to my brain, if I can do that in 15 minutes and come back out, will I see reality differently? Okay, let me practice that. I tend to be more patient. I tend to be more aware. I think the heart is a different consciousness. I tend to be more considerate, more present. I think that's the side effect of doing it. So change is about reminding yourself over and over again. Change is about the overcoming process. The overcoming process is actually the becoming process. And people all the time that heal in this work, they're doing their meditations. They're not doing their meditations to heal. They're doing their meditations to change. And they've discovered that when they change, they heal. So now, if you accept that as a new belief, that when I change, my life will change. And you got to keep reminding yourself of that belief.
You got to keep saying
You got to keep reminding yourself, if I change, because this goes against the program. Like, when my life changes, then I'll change. That's the program. No. When you change, the experiment is, will your life change?
Yes.
Okay, so then now you attack the belief.
Yes.
It's not like, oh my God, this is something that's bigger than me. You attack the belief like, this is no longer serving me. Complaining is making me unhappy.
Yeah.
Living by this emotion, justified or not, is not loving to me. This is down-regulating genes. My body's believing it's living in the same event 24 hours a day if I feel the same emotion. Okay, well, let's change that. So when the person is taking on that belief, like if I change, my life changes. And I think most people try to create a new personal reality as the same personality. It doesn't work. We got to become somebody else. So if you took that on as the truth, okay, I got to remember that if I change, my health could change. If I change, my life could change. Okay, now it's a different game now. It's not like a have to. This is like, I want to change to see my life change, right? It's more of a want to. What
are some of the changes that you've seen people make in their life that have had the biggest changes in their life?
Oh my God. I've seen the most amazing things in the last in the last few years. I mean, the Joe Dispenza that's sitting here today has had a dramatic change in his belief system in witnessing human transformation to the scale that I've witnessed it. That's literally changed my belief in what's possible, right? I mean, in it's coming from the data that we're gathering, but it's also coming from the stories of transformation, testimonials. And this, I have to be careful about this because this is a stretch for a lot of people. I'm not talking about, just 50 people. I'm talking about hundreds, if not thousands of people who've broken the 4-minute mile, that they went from absolute bankruptcy in severe debt to, super abundance, whole new life by changing. I've seen people with all kinds of health conditions, from muscular dystrophy to spinal cord injuries, to Parkinson's disease, to stage 4 cancers, to all kinds of crazy, serious health conditions to go into complete remission. The person changed, and when they changed, their health changed. I've seen people's brain scans when they're in that place of a transcendental experience. I've seen what the brain looks like. That arousal that's taking place in that moment where they're connecting is not fear. It's not anger. It's not pain. That's what typically creates arousal of survival. This arousal is ecstasy. This arousal is bliss. They're having a transcendental moment where they're interacting with something that's beyond their senses, that's causing their body to be lifted and aroused.
How much work does it take?
That's the crazy thing about what we're discovering. Get a group of people together. Give them information that's based on science. Have them understand the information. Have it teach it back to somebody. Have them understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. Combine quantum physics with neuroscience and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics and electromagnetism and Newtonian physics and all that stuff. But make it really simple that it makes sense to them so they can understand it. Leave nothing to conjecture, nothing to superstition, nothing to dogma. Have it wired in their brain so they can teach it back to somebody, they understand it. Set up the conditions in the environment to apply that information, that philosophy, that theory, personalize it, demonstrate it, do something with it. Get your behaviors to match your intentions, get your actions equal to your thoughts, get your mind and body working together, you're gonna have a new experience. Experience enriches circuitry in the brain and it makes a chemical, and that chemical is called a feeling or an emotion. And now you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. Now the knowledge isn't just in the mind. Knowledge is the information and the experience is now in the body. That's what emotion does. So we're chemically instructing our body to understand what our mind has intellectually understood. So you get a group of people together and have them understand information and then go to the application. That you can see that in 7 days, people have these very profound transcendental experiences.
At your progress workshops.
Yeah, and the week-long retreats. And so when we look at the data and people who hit these aroused states, sometimes it's more than 50% of the subjects that we're measuring in terms of their brain scans. So it's not like one person or two people. It happens more and more as people get better at doing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen any key traits that people who accelerate that process have? People who really apply themselves effectively to the process? What kind of traits and characteristics can people develop in order to really see that shift and see that change for themselves?
Yeah, well, I think people have to be present with information. And I think paying attention is being present. And I think it's a skill. And the more you practice it, the better you get at it. But if you're not present, then you can't hear the information because your mind is in the predictable future or the familiar past, right? So that's why online courses for me are just something that I never would ever do, because I don't want to compete with a person's attention, because it's so much easier to forget this information than to remember it, right? But if you can get a community of people together, have them understand the information, and then in 7 days, immerse themselves fully into transformation and change, sooner or later, there's an emergent consciousness that takes place in the collective. And this is what we discovered. One of the things that was so amazing in just looking at the data is you get people from all over the world that come to these events, sometimes the 90 different countries. And you have everybody with their own very specific genotype, and genes make proteins, right? So everybody has their own unique gene expression and their own genotype. But at the end of 7 days, about 80% of the population is expressing the same genes and making the same proteins. That means that the tribe, the flock, the herd, the collective, there's an emergent consciousness where people are biologically evolving together, right? So something happens that's intangible when you get a group of people together and they start overcoming themselves. And they sit with themselves long enough to be curious about what's on the other side of that belief. Instead of saying, I quit and get up and get my cell phone or call somebody or go eat something or go do something, you're going to sit there and you're going to just become really conscious that you're not going to give up on you. You're going to go past that point. And I think giving up on ourselves becomes a habit, right? So allow the person to get beyond, sit long enough that they come up against that emptiness or that pain or that sadness. And instead of getting up and saying, I'm doing my meditation wrong, I understand I'm actually doing it right. This is part of the transformation process. Okay, now that I'm feeling this emotion, let me just lower the volume to this emotion, get back into the present moment. And now you're taming the animal, right?
Yeah.
You're taming the animal self. And it takes an enormous amount of energy, an enormous amount of awareness to do that. So if you give people the information and you give them numerous opportunities to overcome themselves and numerous opportunities to connect, sooner or later, this emergent consciousness will begin to form. And just like infection spreads amongst the community and creates disease, all of a sudden you see health and wealth and abundance and freedom become as infectious as disease. And then that's what we see at the end of 7 days. There is an emergent consciousness that's reflected in people's biology. And genetically, they look like they're living in a new life. Thousands and thousands of metabolites are being released into their blood to suggest they're in a new environment, and they're in a ballroom. And there's nothing really special happening in a ballroom. But their body's looking like they're living in a new life, and they're making thousands of new chemicals, endogenous opioids, chemicals for neurogenesis, chemicals that suppress cancer growth, chemicals that downregulate the genes for Alzheimer's, chemicals that's created a resistance to a spike virus. These are chemicals that the body innately is secreting when it's living in the environment of love. When it's living, the body can be relaxed in the present moment and not be preoccupied with the next moment. We discovered when you're relaxed in your heart and you're awake in your brain, you're in the perfect state.
Relaxed in your heart, awake in your brain.
Yeah, that's the formula. Yeah.
How long does it take scientifically to rewire a belief?
I don't think you could actually measure that. I think there's too many variables. The comprehension of the information, how long the person meditates, how present they are when they are meditating, what their past was like. And there's a lot of variables. I've seen it happen instantaneously. What appears
instantaneous
to be instantaneous, but that person could have been grappling with that belief, for a long period of time. So it turns out when we're relaxed in our heart, the body is believing it's living in a nurturing environment, and it begins to express new genes. And that's exactly how we change.
Because, we always hear that, the famous 30 to 90 days for a habit, like 60 days for a habit, that kind of thing to change a habit. But a belief is so much more deeper than that.
Yeah. Well, a belief is a habit of thinking.
Yeah.
It's just a really unconscious habit of thinking. I think everybody's belief should always be challenged. My belief in what's possible is being challenged today. I think that's fun. Like I watch the scientists that are doing the studies, the empirical studies. I'm watching them run the same experiment 5 times in a row because they're really expecting a different outcome. I know right in that moment they're changing their belief. I know right in that moment they're discovering something new. I know in that moment they're going, oh my, this is unbelievable, right? So I think the greatest belief that we could ever have is our belief in ourselves and our belief in possibility. And I think that has to be earned. That has to be earned. You got to show up for you enough times where you have that belief. You earned it. It's not like you do something in one day. The person who heals from a health condition, who finally says, oh my God, I thought this could work for me. They show up every day. They're showing up every single day, because if they don't show up, then they don't believe it's possible. And they have to show up to prove to themselves that it is. And some of those people did their meditation for a year. And they earned that belief in that future. And of course, the effect was they had that moment that looked like, oh my God, that person just healed. Well, they've been walking the yellow brick road for the last year, and they never missed a day. And they'll tell you, the meditations I remember the most were the hard ones, not the easy ones, the ones where I had to sit with myself and I would not give up. Those are the ones that mattered the most because that's what got them to that point, right? It was the overcoming process. Nobody wants to overcome.
No.
Amazon Prime just spoiled us. You just want it, right? But it's the overcoming process, that 95% that's programmed. That's what you got to dig deep in, and you got to become really conscious of it. And that overcoming process, the side effect of that is the actual becoming process. The body's liberated. Energy naturally moves to the heart. It's not like something that you have to do. The body's no longer tormented emotionally by the past. It's no longer habituated into the past. It's no longer believing in the past. Energy naturally moves into the heart when it's not in survival. It's where it should be going. And now we're ready to create. So it's important for people to understand that you always have to give something up from your past in order to create a new future.
Yeah, we're just so obsessed with the person at the top of the mountain that we don't look at the journey they took to get there.
Sure.
And no matter how many times we know that there is no such thing as an overnight success in any way, in healing or whatever it may be, we constantly feel like, oh, but look at that person. They figured it out and they're enlightened. Maybe they always had it. We're good at ascribing enlightenment to people without thinking that they had a purification journey to get there.
Yeah.
And therefore we kind of believe like we either have it or we don't. We don't believe that journey is possible for us.
Yeah, I think we were told the wrong story. Yeah.
Yeah, we've just kept telling ourselves the wrong story.
Yeah.
I saw in Source, you talked about how protein in meditation that creates immunity. I wanted you to talk about that. That just sounds mind-blowing.
As I said, genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of your body. The expression of proteins is the expression of life. So react and respond to conditions that cause you to feel the emotions of survival. Your reaction or your response to that condition, to that challenge, will actually weaken your body if you keep doing it over and over again. Stress consumes enormous amounts of energy for the body. So the repetition of that begins to downregulate genes and create disease. And so if you can turn on the stress response just by thinking about that problem, your thoughts could make you sick. So the question is, can your thoughts make you well? And so we said to people, okay, trade resentment and impatience and frustration for an elevated emotion like gratitude or appreciation, kindness, and care. We'll hook you up to a heart rate monitor. We want to make sure that your heart is coherent so we know that you're actually feeling these emotions. And we're gonna measure an immunoglobulin called immunoglobulin A, which is really the primary defense against bacteria and virus in your body. It's the body's natural flu shot. And it's suppressed when cortisol levels go up because stress hormones shut down the immune system. So could a person then create an elevated emotion, and the body is so objective that it does not know the difference between a real life experience that's creating that emotion and the emotion that that person is fabricating by thought alone. To the body, it's the unconscious mind, it's the same. So if the person feels the elevated emotion, will they begin to signal new genes that will make new proteins? And we discovered that that particular immunoglobulin A went up by 50% in the subjects that we measured. So feeling elevated emotions causes the body to upregulate genes and allow the immune system to repair and regenerate. Now, that study was our first study, but when we started looking at the plasma of advanced meditators, right around the time COVID happened, and some of our first experiments that we did with the University of California, San Diego, we had all this plasma, and they closed the lab down and closed the university down, and the lab was minimized. But we had all this great plasma from advanced meditators, so there was a little bit of time, so we just started messing around with creating a pseudovirus like a SARS-CoV-2 virus. And we picked the first subject and we did what's called an adoptive transfer. We used his plasma and put the pseudovirus near an ACE2 receptor, which would, what the spike virus attaches to. And we discovered that there was an immunity in the plasma of the advanced meditator where the virus could not enter the cell, like it was like stuck on the outside of the cell. We saw that in novice meditators, there were some that were stuck to the outside of the cell and others that made it into the cell. And then we saw with the controls that they all were in the cell. And so we went through a series of scientific experiments and we isolated that it was a protein. And then we isolated the exact protein that the body in advanced meditators make, and it's called serpin-A5. And if you look online for serpin-A5, it'll tell you that it has a profound effect against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And so the plasma of advanced meditators were naturally creating an elevated level of serpin-A5 that inhibited the virus from entering the cells. In other words, the body is greater than the environment. And so we've replicated the study a few times and we see the same outcomes. We published a paper on it and it's out there.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, we were super surprised. Yeah. We were really surprised.
That
when we
is
saw
very
the effect.
surprising. Yeah. It's mind-blowing to think about that being possible, but I guess it shouldn't be. It's just that we haven't really accessed the true powers of the body and the mind, and we're almost unaware. We always hear that quote of like, you only use 10% of your brain or whatever it is. What has your research found of like how much we're not tapping into the ability that we have?
Well, they used to call this pseudoscience, and I can tell you now, you can't call it pseudoscience. This is what our data suggests. Our data suggests that your autonomic nervous system manufactures a pharmacy of chemicals that works better than any drug. That's what our data shows. A drug study at its best is about 25%. 1 out of 4 people have a response, and it usually takes 3 months or more to have an effect. We're seeing that at the end of 7 days, the 75%, 84%, 100% of the people that are being tested are having the same outcomes. So their plasma, their blood, their brains in 7 days look like advanced meditators, people who just have never meditated before. Every time we've done a study, we have been completely blown away by the power of human potential. We're greater than we think. We're more powerful than we know. We're more unlimited than we can ever dream. And when you have this incredible evidence in science, and you have the incredible evidence in human testimony, I think evidence is the loudest voice, right? So my belief has been absolutely blown away because the data is telling us that we're incredibly powerful. And as an example, just as a fun experiment, we took young people between the ages of 18 and 25, and we paired them with elders that were at least 30 years or more older, in their 60s, 70s, or 80s. And we did brain scans on them and did cognitive tests on them and did some other studies. And the job was that they had to spend the entire 7 days together. They had to eat together. They had to sit next to each other. They had to teach the information back to each other. They had to meditate next to each other. They had to have a huddle at 5:30 in the morning and take these cognitive tests. And it was hilarious because at the beginning of the study, the elders were like, I'm sorry, I have another kid. This kid is not going to work for me. And the young kids were like, oh my God, that person there's no way. They're so mean. I'm never going to make it. And we said, no, that's part of the study. And turns out that they became incredibly connected. And we used people going through a 7-day retreat as the control, which just about 100% of the people's brains changed for the better. So these people, we knew their brains were going to change for the better. But when we paired the young with the old, their brains were comparatively way better than anybody in the community that was going through the event. In other words, the wisdom of the elder somehow was transferred to the youth, and the plasticity of the youth somehow was given to the elder. And when we looked at the post scans of the brain, their forebrains were in beautiful gamma, like super conscious, super present, super aware. And the rest of the brain were these elegant patterns of alpha, creative and relaxed and awake. When we did the cognitive tests, we expected that we were expecting or hoping that the elders would perform better by hanging out with the youth, but we discovered the youth actually performed better by hanging out with the elders. And again, we just never anticipated that. It's so important for you to hang out with your grandparents. Yeah. It's so important to hang out with people that are older than you, because there's an exchange of information, both locally and non-locally, that transforms each other. And we discovered that people change people. That's what community is about. So get a collective network together of 2,000 people or 2,500 people from all over the world. And at the end of 7 days, they're all expressing the same genes, making the same proteins. Their microbiome is dramatically changed. Their microbiome looks like they're a completely different person. They're making 13, 14 different probiotic microbes that would take them months to make, and they're making those in 7 days, right? So the emergent consciousness is being reflected on every level, from brain to heart to microbiome to gene expression to immune system to breast milk. I mean, we're seeing great studies in the breast milk studies we're doing with women that go through a 7-day event. There's information in their breast milk that could heal a wound in 48 hours that would normally take 2 weeks, where there's information in there that's pro-life and pro-growth. So we've never been disappointed, Jay, in any of the studies we've done. We've always sat there and shook our heads. And every now and then a new scientist joins the team, and someone will be presenting on the microbiome as an example, and you see these dramatic changes where people's microbiomes actually look the same, right? So they're not changing their diet, they're not taking a probiotic, they're not staying away from, there's no abstinence from sugar, or, they're just living everything's the same. But their microbiomes are completely different to reflect a different person. There's a neuroscientist in the kind of joined, and she's like, I'm sorry, like, how is this all working? Like, how is the mind producing such dramatic effects on the microbiome in 7 days? So we're never disappointed in the studies we do. So I do think we have a really great potential, human potential. I just think that we have to reframe certain beliefs about health and certain beliefs around lifestyle.
Before I get to my last question, there's one thing I wanted to ask you, which was, you've talked about the power of, you're doing these retreats right now with, you just told me one's coming up with like 8,000 people, 2,500 people, and you're talking about the power of collective consciousness. And I think the world at large is experiencing what seems to be a dividing collective consciousness. And I think even if you look at it on a micro level, let's give an example of like a bunch of friends who like to get together and they like to talk about their challenges and the problems and the issues they're having with whatever it may be. What's kind of collective consciousness is that creating, and how can people elevate each other together as friends? Because in the same way as you said, until we change, nothing changes. We keep seeing the same people, we're all in the same position, and things are not changing. So obviously something hasn't changed.
First thing is that reality is a memory. We see reality through the lens of the past. It's just the way it is. So I have a memory of you, and as long as I have a memory of you, you show up equal to my memory of you, then I'm like, oh, I can recognize Jay. The moment a person starts to change in a small collective community, they don't show up as the memory that people have of them, like something's different, something's out of phase, right? And so then the question's like, what is it? What is it about you? And if the person's happier, then you suspect, oh, they are in love, or oh, they must have got a new job, or they're taking a new drug, a new medication, like whatever it is, right? But they're genuinely just different or happy. So if that consciousness of that small collective is all about evolution, is all about love, is all about growth, you're going to say to that person, so what happened? And that person's going to say, I changed. Like, well, how did you change? I just decided that I was holding on to this emotion, resentment, and I've just been working for the last 2 weeks, and I feel better. Like, I genuinely feel better now that I'm not addicted to that emotion of resentment. Now, the person is naturally going to say, what? Well, how did you do that? Well, okay, and then you get in the conversation about change, right? Now the person's inspired by someone in the flock who's breaking out and changing their consciousness, changing their awareness, changing their energy, changing their emotional state. And it's evident. They're the example. And mirror neurons switch on in the brain, and mirror neurons emulate behavior. So if that person is kind and present and considerate and caring, all of a sudden you're like, wow, Jay is like really present and really cool. And you're going to begin to think about that more and more, and mirror neurons will be like encouraging you to behave like that tribe, that person in the tribe. You get enough people doing that, and then, the collective changes naturally. And of course, it's not a linear process, but that's how people change. Now, on a macroscopic level, like the world, all the time that I've lived on this planet, I've never seen the world personally in the state that it currently is in. And there's a lot of separation. There's a lot of division. There's a lot of extremes. There's a lot of uncertainty. This is a crazy time. And so our curiosity is, there's a collective consciousness in the world. And that collective consciousness is based on the information that the consciousness is being fed, because information causes you to become conscious of whatever you were unconscious to. And you can't have consciousness without energy. You can't have a thought without a frequency. So the division that's taking place collectively is a lot of chaos and a lot of disorder. Okay, so if the energy is chaotic and entropic and disorderly, but there's an enormous amount of it, is there a way to change that energy collectively? And is it the number of people? Is it the amount of energy? Or is it the most coherent signature? And it doesn't have to be a large group. It could be a small collective group with coherent hearts and coherent brains. Could they begin to collectively begin to change the field? And that's what we're looking at. We're looking to see, like in an event that we do with 2,000 people as an example, we have random event generators that are placed all throughout the room, and they're sophisticated coin tosses. And the more you toss a coin, the more it's going to be 50-50. So these machines are tossing thousands of tosses per second. And they're random. It wouldn't be 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, or maybe 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, like that back and forth. But overall, it's 50-50. And if there's nobody in the room, it's always 50-50. Get a collective network of observers together with brain and heart coherence and set an intention for whatever it is. It's just to say, heal others. And all of a sudden, that machine goes 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. It just moves right outside of the norm, outside. So this is a machine that's programmed to flip a coin randomly, and all of a sudden, the effects of a collective network of observers is causing a random event generator to become more orderly. There's an effect that's taking place. Okay, we see it over and over again. We take one of those random event generators and we wrap them in a Faraday cage, like copper and nickel. And heavy metals insulate electromagnetism, and they insulate frequency. You go to the dentist, he puts the lead apron on you. It's to block the radiation from the X-ray, right? So that's frequency. So build a Faraday cage around one of them and insulate them, and all the others are moving outside of normal, but the one that's insulated is behaving as if nobody's in the room. So now we're starting to wonder, is it an electromagnetic energy that actually is having this effect, right? So then how is that important? Well, okay, if you're in survival, you're not going to trust. If you're in survival, it's all about the self. If it's in survival, you're not at your best. You're going to act very primitively. Okay, so coherent heart, magnetic field, coherent brain, electric field. Now you got a Wi-Fi signal. What is the number of people that it would take to begin to produce changes that could be globally? So we did this event in September last year called Walk for the World. And we invited the entire world to walk, to become the very change they want to see in the world. We estimated we had probably about 350,000 people from all over the world in 162 different countries gather together and do this walk. And we were partnering with the HeartMath Institute, and they have these gigantic sensors that measures the Earth electromagnetic field. Okay, so the hypothesis was, if we could change the Earth's field, will it have an effect on human behavior? Like, will it produce some type of change in the collective consciousness? So when we did that walk, we saw the same thing happen that happened in the room with a random event generator. The same exact pattern. They just went, and all of a sudden, at 45 minutes into the walk, you see this dramatic shift in the field of the Earth. So I don't know what it takes, but I do know that an emergent consciousness that could form for humanity is going to have to be a collective consciousness. It's not one soul. It's a collective network. And so just like that flock of birds, just like that school of fish, you study that phenomenon in biology and you think there's some leader that everybody's following, but it's not a top-down phenomenon, it's a bottom-up phenomenon. Everybody's leading. Everybody is behaving in the same way in synchrony. And when that happens, the appearance of a larger organism always takes place, and the tribe comes together. So pro-social networks switch on the brain. We move closer. We bond. We don't see any differences. We come together. We only see the divine in each other, and our appreciation for life, our appreciation for the moment, is enhanced from the experience as well.
So powerful. I mean, that resonates so strongly, and yeah, it's definitely something to aspire to and work towards. Something to kind of lock into creating in our small communities, and not underestimating the value of our ordinariness and how powerful that can be, and how extraordinary it can be when we're connected together.
Yeah. And I think love is the glue, right? You know that. It's what bonds us. It's the magnetic force that draws things together. It's a very limbic brain thing, and falling in love with yourself, falling in love with life, falling in love with a future, falling in love with the moment is why we're here, right? I mean, that's what makes life beautiful. So in the world right now, the world needs everybody. The world needs you, the world needs me, and the world needs everybody to actually show up as the very change they want to see in the world. That means then you're going to have to do things that feel unnatural. That means when everybody else is angry and resentful, you're showing forgiveness. When everybody else is fearful and anxious, that's time to show courage. When people are racing and rushing and competing to get to the top, that's when you stand still and draw the experience to you. And I think when you do that in the beginning, it feels unnatural, but that's how we become supernatural, right? That's how an emergent consciousness can actually form.
Yeah, and the thing that's really going to stay with me today is that I used to believe that the opposite of love was hate, but actually it's stress.
Yeah.
And because a lot of people will say, I'm not a hateful person, but I think everyone will agree that they're a stressed out person.
Yeah. Well, fear is not the opposite of love. It's the separation from it.
Yeah.
And, pain and suffering is not the opposite of love. It's the separation from it. Anger, hatred, hostility, violence, it's not the opposite of love. It's the separation from it.
Mm-hmm.
So then a person who begins to transform themselves, and we work with prisons, thousands and thousands of prisoners. And these are people that can't even close their eyes and meditate because their instinct tells them that something really horrible will happen to them because they've had a turbulent past. You see, prisoners come together, right, and move out of stress. The absence of the addiction to the stress hormones is called joy. The body is free. It's no longer out of balance. And people come back into the balance of their true self. They feel like themselves again. Like, God, I feel like myself again. I got my life back. And I just read a testimonial from one of the veterans that we did a study on PTSD just last week in a retreat that we did. These are people that had some pretty turbulent pasts, and that were suicidal. And this guy said, I was ready to take my life. I was ready. I had the pills to end my own misery. And I feel completely different now. I've got my life back. I got my family back. I got everything is different, right? I'm different. I feel it. I can't stop crying. So the war ended. The war ended for him. It ended. He's not an old soldier now. He's a new soldier, right? It ended. So that person who tells the story of their mental health change, the person who tells the story of their change from their physical health condition, the person who tells the story that's gone from bankruptcy to abundance, the person who tells the story of how the synchronicity of them running into the person that would become the love of their life happened. When they stand on the stage and they tell the story to the collective, there's a change in consciousness because the person's becoming aware. There's truth standing right on the stage. There's an example of truth that's telling them that somehow this person has changed and their life and their health has changed or their future changed in some way. And that 4-minute mile, then, the person that's speaking it is breaking through a certain level of consciousness or unconsciousness. And surely someone in the audience is going to relate with them. Mm-hmm. They're going to see, my goodness, if that person can do it, I can do it as well, right? And that's when it gets really fun because that's when the person believes in themselves a little bit more, right? And their belief in possibility is enhanced. And they're able to make their change in a shorter amount of time. Mm-hmm. In other words, they're shortening the distance between the thought of what they want and the experience of having it when they do it properly, right? So get enough people together in an immersive experience, and someone has that change or that breakthrough. You start seeing like 5 people step out of a wheelchair in one event, 2 people blind, 2 people came to the event blind, seeing at the end of 7 days. It's unbelievable. So the evidence and testimony is that 4-minute mile, and people do the best with what they think is available. So if you don't know, or if you're not conscious of that possibility, you'll make the same choice.
Yes.
And so when people become conscious of it, now they can begin to make a different choice. And I think for as many crazy things that are going on in the world, and that's a whole nother conversation, there's a lot of amazing, great, unbelievable things happening as well, like really amazing things. And so, we just got to hold on.
Absolutely. Joe, thank you so much for coming back onto On Purpose, sharing your incredible research experiences. And this is going to be one of those ones that I'm going to probably listen to again with my eyes closed, because I think there were so many powerful parts that, especially around when we're trying to rewire our thoughts, when we're trying to, as you were saying, to feel and experience something before it happens. I think if we can really just take all of that in, and if we can start to construct our community around us to build a collective consciousness that pushes us all forward, helps us change, I think we'll be onto something. So thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
your time, your energy, your presence.
And make it an experiment.
yes.
Make it an experiment. Don't make it a have to.
Yeah,
Make it a want to. Like, okay, let me just see. If I change my energy, will my life change?
absolutely.
If I change something about me, a belief, a behavior, an emotion, should something in my life, some event begin to change, that's when it becomes exciting, right? And now it's
Well said.
an experiment.
Well said. The Source is out right now. You can go watch as well the new documentary with Dr. Joe Dispenza. And Joe, excited for so much more. Congratulations on all the retreats and workshops. And again, thank you so much for joining me on Purpose.
Thank you, Jay. I always appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If this year you're trying to live longer, live happier, live healthier, go and check out my conversation with the world's biggest longevity doctor, Peter Attia, on how to slow down aging and why your emotional health is directly impacting your physical health.
Acknowledge that there is surprisingly little known about the relationship between nutrition and health. And people are going to be shocked to hear that, because I think most people think the exact opposite.